The story of Rome begins in shadow and legend, where the boundaries between God and man dissolve. Before the marble, before the legions, before the empire that would shape the fate of continents, there were two abandoned children drifting upon the Tiber, Romulus and Remus. Their mother, Rhea Silvia, was a Vestal virgin, sworn to chastity, yet chosen by the god Mars himself to bear divine seed. When her sons were born, the ruling king Amulius, fearing prophecy and divine blood, ordered them drowned. But the river, as though aware of destiny's design, carried the infants safely to a quiet shore beneath the Palatine Hill. There She-Wolf found them. Her milk sustained them. Her warmth protected them. To some, she was an omen of wild fortune, nature embracing civilization yet to come. To others, she was the earthly form of the goddess Lupa, guardian of founders and warriors. In later centuries, philosophers would see her as a symbol of the untamed spirit that lay at Rome's core, savage yet sacred. The twins were discovered by the shepherd Faustulus and his wife, who raised them among flocks and fields. As they grew, they showed signs of power and purpose. They defended the weak, defied tyrants, and learned the language of hills and iron. When they discovered their royal heritage, they resolved to build a city where fate had spared them. But destiny is a blade that cuts both ways. When the brothers quarreled over where to build and who should rule, pride turned to violence. Romulus struck Remus down, and with that act, fraternal love became fratricide. Rome was founded not upon harmony, but upon blood. Romulus marked the sacred boundary of the new city in the year 753 BCE. Around him gathered exiles, wanderers, and fugitives, the rejected of other lands. He gave them a home, a name, and a god of war as patron. This mixture of divine promise and human defiance became Rome's essence. Historians see in this myth the echo of older truths, tribes merging, cultures fusing, power born from struggle. Some theorists even whisper that the myth of Mars and the wolf may hide distant memories of star-born gods, of ancient knowledge lost in time, carried through stories like fossils of forgotten ages. Whatever its origin, the tale of Romulus and Remus reveals the eternal truth of empire. Greatness is never born in peace. Rome began as a wound upon the earth, a scar that would one day stretch across the known world. From that first settlement of huts and fire pits rose a kingdom, a fragile experiment of men learning to rule and be ruled. The Romans remembered 7 kings, each half-shrouded in myth, each leaving a mark upon the soul of the city. Romulus ruled as founder and warrior, uniting tribes and shaping Rome's first legions. When a storm consumed him at the field of Mars, the people said he was taken to the heavens, reborn as the god Quirinus. Thus, divinity and kingship became bound together, a pattern Rome would never escape. Numa Pompilius followed, a man of peace who built temples and bound the people with law. He created sacred rituals, aligned the calendar with the stars, and brought order to Rome's restless heart. Scholars suggest that his wisdom may have come from Etruscan priests or even the distant East, whispers of ancient knowledge moving silently through time. After Numa came Tullus Hostilius, who rekindled the flame of conquest. He destroyed Alba Longa, Rome's mother city, and turned its people into Romans. His death by lightning, the people believed, was the god's punishment for arrogance. Ancus Marcius expanded Rome to the sea, building its first port at Ostia. Tarquinius Priscus, an Etruscan by birth, introduced grandeur, walls, temples, and the beginnings of the great Circus Maximus. Servius Tullius, once a slave, reformed the state itself. He divided the people by wealth, not blood, and gave them voice in assembly. He embodied the Roman paradox, a kingdom both rigid and revolutionary. The last king, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, ruled by fear. His tyranny ended when his son's crime against the noblewoman Lucretia ignited revolt. Her suicide became a symbol of violated virtue and the rebirth of freedom. In 509 BCE, the monarchy fell. Rome swore never again to serve a king. From that oath was born the Republic, a system of checks, laws, and balance, yet haunted by the memory of power. In these 7 kings, ancient historians saw reflections of cosmic order. 7 stars, 7 stages of growth, 7 trials before the soul achieves immortality. Whether history or allegory, their reigns formed the spine of Rome's destiny. Faith, strength, ambition, tyranny, and rebirth, the cycle that would repeat through the centuries. With the fall of kings, Rome entered its age of reason, the Republic. It was a world built on law, duty, and a restless belief that no man should be greater than the state. 2 consuls ruled each year, their power temporary, their authority bound by oath. The Senate guided policy, the assemblies voiced the people, and in this careful balance Rome found its strength. Yet beneath this harmony simmered ambition. The patricians, the old noble families, guarded privilege, while the plebeians demanded rights. The struggle between them shaped the Republic's soul. Through protest and patience, the plebeians won representation, creating tribunes to defend their cause. The 12 tables of law were carved in bronze, so that justice could be seen by all, not whispered by the elite. Rome expanded through necessity and pride. She conquered neighbors, subdued rivals, and absorbed the defeated into her body. Each war brought wealth, slaves, and foreign gods. Soldiers returned with Greek philosophies, Etruscan symbols, and Eastern mysteries, fusing them into a new Roman identity. The Republic celebrated virtus, the courage to sacrifice oneself for the common good. Yet the very system that upheld equality also bred competition. Political careers became pathways to glory, and the love of honor slowly turned into hunger for dominance. Historians describe this as the age of civic virtue, philosophers as the age of temptation. The same Senate that defended liberty would later defend privilege. The same laws that protected the people would one day justify tyranny. Some modern thinkers see the Republic as humanity's greatest experiment, a living engine of order sustained by shared myth. Others wonder if its perfection was unnatural, as though guided by a higher hand, divine, extraterrestrial, or simply the unrecorded wisdom of lost civilizations. But for Rome, destiny was set. The Republic's foundations, though strong, bore the seeds of their undoing. Expansion would bring wealth. Wealth would bring corruption. Corruption would summon the men who believed only they could save her. The Republic was no longer a city-state. It had become an idea too vast, too powerful, too human to endure unbroken. By the 3rd century before the Common Era, Rome's ambitions had outgrown the hills that bore her name. The Republic now stretched across the Italian peninsula, disciplined, united, insatiable. But beyond the western sea lay another power, Carthage, mistress of the waves, heir to the Phoenician mariners. 2 civilizations, born of different elements, one of iron and land, the other of salt and water, were destined to collide. Carthage was ancient, founded by Queen Dido, whom legend ties to the myths of Tyre and the goddess Astarte. Her people were merchants and navigators, their wealth drawn from the endless blue of the Mediterranean. Rome, by contrast, had no navy worthy of the name, no tradition of sailing. Yet fate, it seems, delights in contradiction. When the First Punic War began in 264 BCE, Rome adapted with astonishing speed. Captured Carthaginian ships became blueprints for Roman ingenuity. Farmers became sailors, legions learned the language of the tide, and the corvus, the boarding bridge, turned sea battles into land fights upon the water. After 2 decades of blood and storm, Carthage sued for peace. Rome emerged not just as a land power, but as master of the Western Sea. But victory bred vengeance. In Carthage's shadow rose Hannibal Barca, a name that even now trembles with defiance. Son of Hamilcar, sworn from youth to hate Rome, Hannibal crossed the Alps in 218 BCE with elephants and armies, a feat that defied both nature and reason. For years, he ravaged Italy. Cannae became a tomb for Roman pride, 70,000 dead in a single day. Yet even in defeat, Rome's endurance proved greater than Hannibal's brilliance. The Republic refused to surrender. Slowly, patiently, she strangled Carthage's lifelines until Scipio Africanus carried the war into Africa itself, defeating Hannibal at Zama in 202 BC. The Third Punic War would end the saga. Carthage, once radiant, was besieged, burned, and cursed. Its walls were torn down, its people enslaved, its memory salted into oblivion. Rome stood alone as ruler of the Western world. Some historians see in this rivalry more than mere politics, a battle between cosmic archetypes. Rome, the child of Mars, represented discipline and fire. Carthage, child of Astarte and the sea, embodied wealth and mystery. Their struggle was the clash of elements, of masculine and feminine, of war and trade, of iron and wave. Yet, as Carthage perished, Rome inherited its empire and its curse. The spoils of victory would erode the very virtues that had sustained a republic. For when nations conquer the world, they often lose the strength that made them conquerors. The 2nd century BCE was an age of triumph, yet beneath triumph lay decay. Conquest had made Rome rich, too rich. Gold and slaves poured into the city. Estates grew vast while small farmers vanished. The Senate ruled not for virtue, but for profit. The ideals of the Republic, simplicity, service, and civic honor, began to crumble. Into this corruption stepped men of vision and ambition. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, sought to restore justice by redistributing land and curbing the Senate's greed. They believed Rome could be saved by returning to its founding principles: equality of duty, balance of class, the shared burden of greatness. But their reforms threatened privilege, and both brothers were slain, one beaten in the forum, the other hunted to death. Their blood marked the beginning of Rome's internal wars. From their ashes rose soldiers who owed loyalty not to the Republic, but to their commanders. Gaius Marius, a man of humble birth, reformed the army, opening its ranks to the poor. His legions were professional, disciplined, and utterly devoted to him. In their hearts, the Republic began to die. Then came Sulla, his rival and mirror, cold, brilliant, merciless. When the Senate denied him command, he marched his army on Rome itself, a crime once unthinkable. Blood ran through the streets. Proscriptions followed. Enemies vanished into death or exile. Sulla restored the Senate's power and retired, but his example lingered. Power could now be taken by force. The Republic no longer belonged to the people. It was a battlefield of generals. Ambition had replaced law. Wealth had replaced virtue. In this twilight, strange omens filled the skies. Comets, earthquakes, and storms that ancient chroniclers saw as signs of divine disapproval. Philosophers warned that when men rival the gods, fate must intervene. Others, more esoteric, spoke of cycles, that civilizations like stars burn brightest before collapse. It was as though the gods who had once guarded Rome had grown silent, leaving their creation to test itself. The Republic had reached the limits of mortal order. It awaited a new kind of ruler, not a king, but something far greater and more dangerous. In the year 100 BCE, under the shadow of this crumbling republic, Julius Caesar was born. His lineage traced to Venus through Aeneas, the Trojan hero, a claim that bound him not only to history, but to myth itself. His life would blur the line between mortal and divine, between savior and destroyer. From youth, Caesar possessed an unshakable conviction that destiny had chosen him. Captured once by pirates, he promised to crucify them, and did. As general, he conquered Gaul with unmatched brilliance, subduing tribes from the Atlantic to the Rhine. His victories made him a legend, his legions his throne. The Senate, fearful of his growing power, ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome. Caesar refused. In 49 BCE, he crossed the Rubicon River, the boundary no general was meant to cross under arms. With those words, Alia iacta est, the die is cast, he sealed the Republic's fate. Civil war followed. Pompey the Great, once his ally, became his rival. Rome was divided, brother against brother once more. Caesar triumphed swiftly, then pardoned his enemies, seeking to heal what war had torn. Yet peace under one man's will is tyranny by another name. He reformed the calendar, the Senate, the grain laws, even citizenship itself. He dreamed of empire as unity, not conquest, a Rome that could transcend its walls and bloodlines. But such vision threatened those who clung to the old order. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, the Senate struck. Brutus, Cassius, and others drove their daggers into Caesar's flesh, believing they were saving the Republic. Yet in killing him, they ensured its death. The blood that fell at Pompey's statue consecrated not freedom, but empire. Historians remember Caesar as both tyrant and visionary, conqueror and reformer. Mystics see in his rise the fulfillment of ancient cycles, the return of divine kingship first seen in Romulus. His murder was not an ending, but a transformation. From the void his death created, a new Rome would be born, ruled not by citizens, but by emperors. Thus ended the age of the Republic, and thus began the age of destiny. Out of the chaos that followed Caesar's murder rose a new order, delicate yet inevitable. The conspirators who struck in the name of liberty found themselves hunted by their own ideals. In the vacuum of power stood a young man, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir, scarcely 20 years old. Few suspected that within his calm and measured heart burned a will greater than all who came before him. Octavian moved with patience where others lunged with fury. Mark Antony, once Caesar's loyal general, sought to inherit his master's mantle, while Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt and living goddess of Isis, offered alliance through love and ambition. Their bond symbolized the last shimmer of Hellenistic majesty, a union of East and West that threatened to eclipse Rome itself. Octavian understood that victory required more than armies. It demanded narrative. He became the author of his own myth, casting Antony and Cleopatra as corruptors of Roman virtue. When their fleet fell at Actium in 31 BCE, the world shifted. The sea that had once borne Carthaginian sails now reflected only Rome's supremacy. Octavian returned not as conqueror, but as savior. The Senate, weary of war, named him Augustus, the revered one. The Republic, in name, still stood, but its soul had transformed. Power flowed from one man, veiled in the robes of legality. The people called him princeps, first among equals, yet all knew the truth. The age of the emperors had begun. Augustus restored temples, revived ancient rites, and declared a moral rebirth. He closed the gates of Janus, symbol of war, declaring peace throughout the world, the Pax Romana. Yet this peace, like the marble of his city, gleamed atop foundations of conquest. His reign, though tranquil, rested upon a quiet dread, the knowledge that stability depends on one man's breath. He ruled for 4 decades, turning brick to marble, chaos to order. In his lifetime, Rome's borders reached from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. The empire became a living organism, pulsing with trade, art, and law. And when he died, Rome did not crumble. It bowed its head as though a god had passed into eternity. In Augustus, the myth of Rome fulfilled itself. He was both man and symbol, heir to Venus and Caesar, child of prophecy and politics. Some later mystics claimed that in his reign, the heavens aligned, marking a new cosmic age, that the birth of another world faith would soon coincide with the apex of Rome's power. Whether coincidence or destiny, his era became the hinge upon which the world would turn. For 2 centuries, the Roman world enjoyed what poets called the Golden Peace. Roads stretched like veins from the heart of Rome to the edges of earth. Aqueducts brought rivers to thirsty cities. Laws and language bound distant peoples beneath one order. From Britannia to Judea, from the sands of Africa to the forests of Germania, all paid homage to the eagle standard. The empire's genius lay not merely in its swords, but in its systems. Provinces governed themselves under Roman oversight. Citizens enjoyed protection of law, trade, and security unknown elsewhere. Architecture reached divine proportion. The Pantheon, the Colosseum, the Forum of Trajan, testaments in stone to eternity's illusion. Yet beneath the harmony, disquiet murmured. Wealth from conquest deepened class divides. Emperors grew godlike, their statues staring down upon men. The line between ruler and deity blurred. In the provinces, ancient gods mingled with Roman ones. Isis with Venus, Mithras with Mars, Yahweh with Jupiter. The empire became a spiritual crossroads, a mirror of the human soul, disciplined, magnificent, and lost. Some saw in the Pax Romana a prelude to divine revelation. Philosophers spoke of a coming savior, a universal spirit to redeem the world from decadence. In Judea, under Roman rule, such a figure appeared, a teacher proclaiming a kingdom not of this world. Few noticed then, yet his message would one day outlast the empire that crucified him. Meanwhile, Rome's power reached its zenith. The legions stood unchallenged. Art, philosophy, and law flourished. The emperors of the 5 good reigns, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, Marcus Aurelius, governed with wisdom that later generations would call divine. Hadrian, in his melancholy, built walls to mark the limits of the world. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher-emperor, wrote meditations on virtue while defending the frontiers against barbarian storms. To the mystics of later ages, the Pax Romana was not merely political peace, but cosmic balance, the height of human civilization before the inevitable decline. The alignment of empire, faith, and reason formed a harmony so perfect that nature itself seemed to hold its breath. Yet in all things mortal, perfection is the beginning of decay. As the sun of peace reached its zenith, shadows began to lengthen across the borders. No empire falls in a day. The end begins as whispers, the edge of the coin losing its gleam, the soldier's oath spoken with less conviction, the Senate's words hollowing into ceremony. By the late 2nd century, the gods had grown silent. After the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE, his son Commodus took the throne, a man of arrogance and vanity, more enamored with spectacle than statecraft. He styled himself as Hercules reborn, fought mock battles in the arena, and drained the treasury in pursuit of divine worship. The age of philosopher kings was over. The age of spectacle had begun. Civil war followed his death. Generals rose and fell in swift succession, proclaimed emperor by their legions and murdered by them soon after. The empire fractured not along its borders, but within its spirit. Each province sought its own protector. Loyalty became a commodity. Meanwhile, the outer world pressed in. Germanic tribes, once mere shadows beyond the Rhine, grew restless. The Parthians and later the Sassanids challenged Rome's eastern power. Plague swept through cities, emptying streets once filled with marble and song. Historians call this the crisis of the 3rd century. 50 years when the empire nearly ceased to exist. 20 emperors ruled in rapid succession. Few died peacefully. The gods of old seemed powerless, their temples echoing with unanswered prayers. Yet in chaos there was adaptation. From the ruins rose men like Aurelian and Diocletian, who reforged the empire with discipline and division. They split rule between East and West, hoping to preserve what remained. Diocletian's reforms brought order, but at a cost. Freedom bent beneath the weight of bureaucracy, and the emperor became more divine than ever before. Some scholars see this transformation as Rome's attempt to transcend itself, to move from human governance to something mechanical, eternal, beyond decay. Others believe it was the soul's last struggle against inevitable entropy, the cosmic law that all great powers obey. In mythic symbolism, the empire had entered its autumn. The marbles still shone in the sun, but beneath its polish lay cracks. What began with a wolf and two brothers had become an edifice too vast to sustain its own legend. The fires of decline had been lit, small, smoldering, unstoppable. Amid the wreckage of civil strife and fractured empires, there arose a figure destined to redefine Rome's soul. His name was Constantine, son of Constantius and Helena, born in an age when gods had grown weary and men sought new light. He would fuse empire and eternity, power and faith, crown and cross. When Constantine seized the purple in 306 CE, the empire was a mosaic of soldiers' allegiances and provincial loyalties. His rule was challenged by rivals, each declaring divine sanction. But Constantine's destiny was written not in politics, but in vision. Before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, as he faced his final enemy Maxentius, he claimed to see a sign in the sky, a cross of light, accompanied by the words in Hoc Signo Vinces, "In this sign, conquer." Whether miracle, dream, or calculated omen, it changed the course of history. He ordered his troops to bear the new symbol, and when victory came, he attributed it not to Jupiter or Mars, but to the Christian God. In that moment, Rome's thousand-year devotion to its pantheon began to fade. Constantine legalized Christianity, ending centuries of persecution. Temples of old gods stood beside new churches, marble idols beside wooden crosses. The empire entered a spiritual metamorphosis, one that would outlast its borders. He founded a new capital in the east, a city of 7 hills like Rome itself, but facing the rising sun. Constantinople, the bridge between Europe and Asia, pagan past and Christian future. Some saw him as chosen by heaven, others as a politician of supreme genius. Perhaps he was both. For Constantine's empire was more than geographical, it was symbolic. The eagle now soared with the cross, the sword of Mars replaced by the faith of Christ. Yet this transformation was not peace. Old traditions resisted, philosophers mourned the death of the ancient gods, and Christians themselves were divided by doctrine. The Council of Nicaea in 325 sought unity, defining orthodoxy even as it sowed new conflicts. To mystics, Constantine's vision marked the merging of heaven and empire, the final union of spiritual and temporal authority that men had pursued since the dawn of civilization. But to historians, it was a bargain. Rome exchanged its ancient gods for immortality of a different kind, no longer in marble, but in faith. In the centuries to come, emperors would wear crowns forged in his image, kings would rule by his example, and the shadow of the cross would stretch over the ruins of the world. When Constantine died, the empire he forged was too vast for one man's grasp. His successors divided it, not as enemies, but as heirs. The Western Empire, ruled from Rome and later Ravenna, bore the legacy of the old republic, the Senate, the Latin tongue, and the weary heart of tradition. The Eastern Empire, ruled from Constantinople, looked to the future, Greek in culture, Christian in spirit, and enduring in strength. This division, though practical, marked a spiritual fracture. The West faced constant assault. Gothic tribes pressed against its borders. Vandals roamed its provinces, and legions grew thin, defending too many frontiers with too few loyal men. The East, rich in trade and culture, thrived under strong emperors and a resilient bureaucracy. The Roman world became two mirrors reflecting different destinies. In the West, power decayed, but legend grew. The old gods lingered in stone and story. The Latin poets still sang of Mars and Venus, even as their temples fell to ruin. In the East, faith transformed into empire. Mosaics of Christ replaced marble effigies of Jupiter. The Hagia Sophia rose like a celestial crown. Yet both have claimed the same legacy. The eagle still spread its wings over laws and legions, but now one held the cross, the other the sword. By the late 4th century, Emperor Theodosius declared Christianity the state religion, sealing the fate of pagan Rome. The sacred fire of Vesta was extinguished. The oracles of Delphi fell silent. To many, it was the death of an age, the passing of the gods who had once walked the hills of Latium. But perhaps it was not death, only transformation. The same divine yearning that had built temples now built cathedrals. The same discipline that once forged legions now forged monasteries. The empire's spirit was not extinguished. It was reborn in another form. The philosophers of the East spoke of cycles, of civilizations as phoenixes rising from their own ashes. Rome, they said, was eternal, not as a city, but as an idea, order against chaos, unity against division, light against the endless dark. Yet even as Constantinople flourished, the West withered. In its decaying grandeur, it awaited its final reckoning, not from rebellion within, but from the endless march of those it had once called barbarians. The final centuries of the Western Empire were not sudden collapse, but a slow unraveling. The frontiers that had once marked Rome's might become wounds through which chaos bled. Across the Rhine and the Danube, new peoples gathered. Goths, Vandals, Huns, drawn by the empire's fading warmth, repelled by its pride, and driven by the restless movements of tribes upon tribes, as if the earth itself were shifting beneath them. In 410 CE, the unimaginable occurred. Rome was sacked. Alaric and his Visigoths entered the Eternal City. For 3 days, fire and terror consumed what had been the world's heart. The temples of Jupiter stood in silence. The Senate wept amid ashes. To those who survived, it felt as though the universe itself had ended. Yet Rome did not die in fire. Not yet. The empire still lingered in name, its emperor's shadows of former glory. The Vandals seized Africa. The Huns thundered from the steppes under Attila, and provinces once loyal now became kingdoms in their own right. The Western army, once disciplined and invincible, filled its ranks with mercenaries and federati, men who fought for Rome but no longer believed in her. In 476 CE, the inevitable came. The Germanic general Odoacer deposed the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus, a name both symbolic and cruel, echoing the first founder and the last ruler. He sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, acknowledging one emperor in the east. Thus ended the Western Roman Empire, not with a final battle, but with resignation. To the chroniclers of the age, it seemed divine justice. Augustine, writing after the sack, proclaimed that the city of God would endure even as the city of man crumbled. Others believed Rome's fall marked the turning of the great cycle, a celestial rhythm in which empires rise like constellations and fade like dying stars. But even as the western walls fell to ruin, the Eastern Empire stood unbroken. Constantinople, crowned in gold, watched from afar, heir to both pagan wisdom and Christian faith. The spirit of Rome had not perished. It had migrated eastward, awaiting rebirth. The barbarians who conquered her lands adopted her language, her laws, her dreams. Rome was no longer a place, but a memory, a heartbeat echoing through the centuries. Though the West lay in ruins, Rome did not die. She merely shifted her throne. From the glittering shores of the Bosporus, a new Rome rose, not of marble wolves and iron legions, but of domes, icons, and gold. Constantinople, the city of Constantine, became the torchbearer of a civilization reborn. The Eastern Empire called itself Roman, Basileia Romaean, for its people knew no other name. Its emperors wore the purple of Augustus. Its laws spoke with the authority of Caesar. Yet this Rome was transformed, Greek in tongue, Christian in faith, and imperial in spirit. Its armies defended not the republic, but the faith. Its emperors ruled not as men, but as gods chosen on earth. The city itself was a marvel, encircled by mighty walls of Theodosius, guarded by the Golden Horn. Constantinople shone like a gem between continents. Merchants from the ends of the earth crowded its markets. Scholars preserved the wisdom of Greece and Rome. priests chanted beneath glittering mosaics that mirrored the heavens. This Eastern Rome was both fortress and sanctuary, a living bridge between antiquity and the Middle Ages. When barbarian kingdoms fought over the bones of the West, Constantinople remained a beacon of continuity. It was said that when the lamps of Europe were extinguished, Byzantium kept the flame. Yet the empire's brilliance was matched by intrigue. Court politics were a labyrinth of ambition and faith, where theologians debated the nature of Christ as fiercely as generals defended the borders. The empire's heart beat to the rhythm of paradox, opulence beside piety, intellect beside superstition, immortality beside decay. To philosophers, Byzantium was Rome's second incarnation, the phoenix reborn from the ashes of its western twin. Some even claimed it fulfilled an ancient prophecy, that the spirit of empire would migrate eastward as the sun does, ever seeking new dawns. For nearly 1,000 years after the fall of Rome, Constantinople would stand unbroken, the last and greatest child of an immortal mother. In the 6th century, a man arose who dared to dream as Caesar once had. His name was Justinian, emperor of Byzantium, ruler of both faith and empire. His reign was a mosaic of brilliance and suffering, the last attempt to restore Rome's universal dominion. Justinian was no mere ruler. He was a visionary. He sought to reunite the lost western provinces, to bind law, architecture, and religion into one divine order. His ambition burned with both genius and hubris. With his general Belisarius, he reconquered North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain. For a brief, blazing moment, the Mediterranean was once again a Roman sea. But conquest carried cost. War drained the treasury, plague ravaged the empire, and nature itself seemed to rebel. In 542 CE, the plague of Justinian swept through Constantinople, killing millions, a grim echo of divine warning. Yet amid loss, Justinian built wonders. The Hagia Sophia, his masterpiece, rose from the ashes of riot and destruction. Its dome seemed to float upon light itself, an earthly heaven where God and emperor might meet. He reformed the empire's laws into the corpus juris civilis, the foundation of modern legal systems. Scholars and jurists would one day call him the emperor who conquered time, for his code outlived his walls. But Justinian's greatness was shadowed by doubt. His wars stretched the empire thin. His reforms strained the people. His wife, Theodora, once an actress, ruled beside him with brilliance and iron resolve. Their partnership embodied Byzantium's spirit, ambition tempered by endurance, majesty born of struggle. When Justinian died in 565 CE, the dream of a restored Roman Empire faded with him. His reconquests slipped away, the treasury emptied, and the frontiers weakened. Yet his vision endured, not as territory, but as legacy. His laws shaped Europe's conscience. His cathedral became the symbol of faith triumphant over ruin. To later ages, Justinian's reign appeared like a flare before darkness, the last great blaze of imperial unity before the long twilight of medieval Christendom. Mystics saw in him the last echo of Jupiter's thunder and the first reflection of divine kingship. In him, Rome dreamed one final time of eternity. After Justinian, the empire entered its slow descent, not of sudden fall, but of transformation. The once vast dominion shrank under the weight of time and tide. From the deserts came the armies of a new faith, Islam, fierce and inspired. Within a century, Syria, Egypt, and North Africa were lost, their cities now whispering prayers in Arabic where Latin and Greek once ruled. The Byzantines fought not only for land, but for identity. They turned inward, their empire evolving into a spiritual kingdom. The emperor now ruled as God's vicegerent. The church became both shield and judge. Icons adorned every wall, their painted eyes eternal witnesses to the struggle between flesh and faith. Wars of doctrine divided the empire, the iconoclasts shattering sacred images, the defenders of icons restoring them. Each victory left the state more brittle. Yet through all turmoil, Byzantium endured. The double-headed eagle watched east and west, symbol of dual sovereignty, heaven and earth, spirit and empire. While the West descended into feudal night, Byzantium kept the ancient world alive. Its scholars copied Plato and Aristotle. Its engineers preserved the sciences of Alexandria. From its libraries would later flow the wisdom that rekindled the Renaissance. But even endurance bends before destiny. The empire faced endless assaults: Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, and eventually the Turks. Earthquakes shook its cities, fires consumed its palaces, and each generation fought the same battle for survival. Yet still, the city stood, queen of cities, fortress of the faith, the last living breath of Rome. To the chroniclers, Byzantium became less an empire than a miracle, a golden thread connecting the pagan past to the Christian world. Some said it was sustained not by men, but by divine will, protected until its appointed end. In the West, Rome's name became legend. In the East, it was still reality. The emperors called themselves Romans. Their citizens prayed in Greek. Their world balanced between two eternities. The long twilight of Rome had begun, a dusk that would last 1,000 years, glowing faintly with the fire of an undying dream. By the 11th century, the Empire of the East stood old yet unbroken, weary from centuries of siege and miracle. Its emperors still wore the purple. Its domes still gleamed in sunlight. But the world beyond had changed. In the West, kingdoms forged from Rome's ashes had grown restless and proud, and from the deserts of Arabia to the walls of Jerusalem, new powers ruled the Holy Land. When the Seljuk Turks defeated the Byzantines at Manzikert in 1071, the empire trembled. Emperor Alexios Komnenos, desperate for aid, turned westward to the lands that had once been Rome's children. His plea crossed mountains and languages and reached the ear of Pope Urban II, who saw in it not just a call for help, but a divine opportunity. In 1095, at Clermont, the Pope proclaimed a holy war, a crusade to reclaim Jerusalem from infidels and unite Christendom under one banner. Knights, peasants, and kings answered, their crosses stitched to tunics, their hearts alight with zeal and greed in equal measure. The First Crusade succeeded where few believed possible. Jerusalem fell in 1099, drenched in blood and sanctity. For a moment, the West seemed to avenge its fallen mother, yet the truth was more complex. The Crusaders carved kingdoms from Byzantine lands, mistrusting the empire they claimed to aid. Byzantium survived the flood of faith and steel, but was never the same. The Crusades drained her strength, turned allies into rivals, and revealed the fractures within Christendom itself. The Pope's blessing had unleashed a storm that no emperor could control. The bitter culmination came in 1204, when the Fourth Crusade, meant for Egypt, turned its fury upon Constantinople itself. Lured by greed and politics, the Latin armies sacked the Queen of Cities, looting her palaces, defiling her churches, and melting her icons into coin. For 3 days, the city that had outlasted centuries of sieges fell to those who bore the cross. To the Byzantines, it was not conquest, but betrayal. The second death of Rome, this time at the hands of her own children. Though the empire would reclaim the city decades later, its glory never recovered. The Crusades had not only weakened Byzantium, they had changed the world's faith and unity. Historians see this as the moment when the West surpassed the East, when medieval Europe rose upon the ruins of the ancient empire. But mystics whisper that Rome's spirit, wounded yet undying, retreated once more into silence, awaiting rebirth in another form. The 15th century dawned upon a world transformed. Gunpowder thundered where once spears clashed. Kings ruled with ambition once reserved for emperors. And beyond the Bosporus, a new power gathered. The Ottoman Turks, heirs of the East's vast plains, driven by faith and destiny. By 1453, The empire that called itself Rome had shrunk to the city of Constantinople and a few outlying lands. Its emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, bore the name of the first Christian ruler, as though fate itself had written poetry and tragedy. For 53 days, the city endured siege. Cannons roared against the Theodosian walls, those same bastions that had defied centuries. The defenders, Greeks, Italians, monks, and mercenaries, fought with the courage of ghosts. Within the Hagia Sophia, prayers rose like smoke, mingling with the scent of burning oil and fear. On May 29th, 1453, the final assault came. The gates broke, the walls fell. The emperor cast aside his crown and vanished into battle, choosing death over surrender. When the dawn rose over the Bosporus, the crescent moon shone above the shattered cross. Constantinople had fallen. The world changed forever. To the Ottomans, it was Istanbul, the jewel of their empire. To Christendom, it was apocalypse. The last ember of the Roman world had been extinguished. Yet even in ruin, the spirit of Rome refused to die. Scholars fled westward, carrying with them the manuscripts of Plato, Aristotle, and the forgotten sciences. They found refuge in Italy, the cradle of Rome reborn. There, their knowledge would ignite the Renaissance, breathing new life into a world that had slumbered for 1,000 years. Some called the fall of Constantinople divine punishment. Others saw it as the closing of one cosmic age and the opening of another. The empire of stone and law was gone, but its inheritance, language, philosophy, art, and faith passed into the veins of Europe. Rome's fall was not death. It was transmutation. The marble had crumbled, but the idea endured, reborn in brushstroke and scripture, in cathedral and crown. From the ashes of Constantinople rose a new dawn in the West. Across Florence, Venice, and Rome itself, artists, thinkers, and dreamers rediscovered the ancient wisdom carried from the fallen East. The Renaissance, the rebirth, was not merely a revival of learning, but the resurrection of memory. In marble and paint, the gods of antiquity walked again. Michelangelo's David stood as Apollo reborn. Leonardo's Vitruvian Man measured the perfection of divine geometry. Brunelleschi's domes reached skyward as heirs of Roman engineering. The lost language of empire, Latin, became once more the language of scholarship and power. Yet this rebirth was haunted. Behind every fresco and manuscript lingered the shadow of the empire that had once ruled the world. The ruins of the Forum whispered to those who would listen, and scholars spoke of Roma Aeterna, eternal Rome, not as a place, but as an ideal that could never die. In papal courts and princely halls, men debated whether the new age could equal the grandeur of the old. The popes, heirs to both Caesar and Peter, rebuilt St. Peter's Basilica upon the bones of imperial Rome, claiming not merely spiritual, but worldly authority. The Roman Church became a new kind of empire, one of souls rather than swords. Some believed this Renaissance was prophecy fulfilled, that Rome, having died in body, now rose in spirit. Others saw in it a dangerous illusion, that mankind, intoxicated by its own genius, was repeating the ancient cycle of pride and fall. But beneath the debates, one truth endured. The essence of Rome, her discipline, her architecture, her dream of universality, had never vanished. It had migrated, adapted, and returned. The legions had turned into scholars, the emperors into patrons, the marble into canvas. Through the Renaissance, humanity rediscovered itself by remembering Rome. And in doing so, the empire, though gone, achieved what its founders had once dared to imagine: eternity through memory. Rome was gone, yet she was everywhere. Her body had perished, but her soul had scattered like seeds upon the wind. Each kingdom that rose in her shadow claimed her bloodline. Each crown bore her echo. The Holy Roman Empire in the German lands called itself her heir. Russia would name itself the Third Rome. Even far empires across oceans would look back to her for their symbols of order and dominion. Her laws endured in parchment and in practice. The Corpus Juris Civilis of Justinian became the foundation of modern jurisprudence, defining rights and duties, inheritance and citizenship, the grammar of civilization. Her roads became the skeleton of Europe's trade, her aqueducts the model for modern cities. Every stone laid by her engineers whispered permanence. Her language became the mother of tongues. Latin, the language of the legions and the church, evolved into the speech of nations. Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. Her alphabet crossed continents. Her calendar marked time itself. Even a numbering of years, once reckoned ob urb condita, from the founding of the city, now flowed from the birth of the faith she helped shape. Rome's influence reached deeper still into the architecture of the mind. The republic she once built inspired revolutions millennia later. When philosophers of Enlightenment dreamed of balance and law, they dreamed in Latin. The founders of new republics, from the banks of the Seine to the shores of the Atlantic, looked to her Senate, her tribunes, her courage, her failures. Yet Rome's legacy was not merely structure. It was the eternal tension between order and freedom, virtue and ambition, faith and power. Each age has inherited this duality. For every law she gave the world, she also gave warning that empires rise not only by strength, but by belief, and when belief fades, even the strongest walls crumble. Some see in her story the reflection of the human soul itself, ever reaching upward, building, conquering, decaying, and rebuilding again. Historians have measured her in centuries, poets in symbols, mystics in cycles of eternity. Was Rome a divine experiment, a celestial pattern repeating through time? Or was she merely mankind's grandest mirror, showing us what we become when we mistake greatness for immortality? Her ruins remain, not as tombs, but as lessons. The arches still stand, the stones still speak. They remind us that even in decay, there is dignity, and that civilization's true monument is not conquest, but continuity. Rome's fall was not the end of history. It was the moment history began to remember itself. 2.5 millennia after Romulus drew his furrow in the soil, the world still speaks Rome's name. Her myths have become the grammar of civilization. Her image, the archetype of power and destiny. Beneath modern capitals, Paris, London, Washington, Moscow, Rome's shadow endures. Columns rise like echoes of her temples. Senates convene beneath domes descended from her forums. Armies march to rhythms she first defined. But more enduring than her architecture is her idea, that humanity can forge order from chaos, that law can outlast kings, that vision can bind the disparate and the divine. It is an idea older than the city itself, one whispered by rivers and gods, by wolves and men. Every generation rediscovers Rome in its own reflection. To the Middle Ages, she was the memory of glory. To the Renaissance, the promise of rebirth. To the modern world, a warning that empires like men are mortal. Yet her name remains the measure by which all greatness is judged. There are those who look deeper still, who see in her rise and fall a spiritual rhythm older than history. They speak of forgotten ages, of Atlantis and lost civilizations, of cosmic cycles that bring forth empires as seasons bring forth flowers. In their eyes, Rome was not accident, but recurrence, a manifestation of the eternal pattern by which creation ascends, declines, and ascends again. Others, grounded in reason, see her endurance in human memory as proof not of divine plan, but of human will, that we remember Rome because she embodied what we most desire: mastery, unity, permanence. Yet both views converge in awe, for no other empire has so perfectly mirrored both the brilliance and the frailty of mankind. The story of Rome is not merely the chronicle of cities and Caesars. It is the chronicle of us, of humanity's dream to transcend itself, to build in stone what the heart imagines eternal. Her ruins are not relics, they are promises. Somewhere, beneath the dust of centuries, the wolf still nurses her children. The Tiber still murmurs beneath bridges of time. And the voice of Rome, quiet yet unbroken, still whispers to every generation that listens. I'm not dead. I am transformed. Wherever law endures, wherever courage rises, wherever men remember their beginnings, there I live.